the system that we developed, the structure that we developed in Hashkafa, the information that we understood led us to some very critical questions. And that's the true nature of intellectual growth. Intellectual growth does not mean that, I hear a question, I have a question, I don't understand, I don't know something. True intellectual growth means that you're building your ideas and connecting them, and suddenly all the system leads you off on a certain path and it doesn't make sense. It's not consistent with some information that you know. So something has to be done. You have to alter the information or something like that. The big problem we had was that the information that we've developed up to now said the following. The recipient, the one who's supposed to be makabel the Torah of the Bnei Shalom, is the Adam, is the person, the man. And the Adam is composed of a neshama and a guf. Essentially what happens is the neshama itself, because of it's placed in the guf, and once it's placed in the guf, it becomes imprisoned in terms of its ability to experience certain realities. It can no longer experience its own reality, which is ruchnius. Okay. The existence and presence of the Bnei Shalom is hidden. It's not known anymore. But the neshama is still able to connect to its own reality, and it can feel aspects of ruchnius. And that which it feels, its aspects of ruchnius, it filters through what's called the seichel, the das, or the mind, the logical inferential aspect of the person. But it's more than just logic, it's desire to know emes, or the desire to know truth. It's a feeling of what is real, what is not real, what is true and what is not true. This koyach comes from the neshama, and therefore we said that for all practical purposes the neshama is synonymous with the Yetzer Tov. The guf on the other hand, the guf on the other hand is a different entity. The neshama is a certain entity. It's constructed with certain kind of substance. The substance that it's constructed with is spiritual substance on a certain level. It's a substance, just like the body is composed of a substance. There is no difference, except that its substance is much finer, in a sense. It's much finer. Somewhat like a solid, liquid, and gas. A gas is much more finer in a sense. It's more. Its substance is composed differently. It's not a great mashal because in certain ways, but essentially the substance of the neshama is very fine in terms of its existential plane. It has a much greater kedusha. It has tremendous ruchnius in it. Almost is a pure spirit, whatever that substance is. Malachim are composed also of ruchnius. They also have substances. They're composed of it's a lower substance. Now, but it's an entity. It has structure also. And the neshama has structure. It's composed in a certain way. And it has certain, if we could say, a physiology and anatomy. You see, it works, it has certain functional components and so on, and it works in a certain way. The guf is another entity. What is that, a guf? A guf is essentially a substance. The substance in this case is much more identifiable. The substance of the guf is physical matter. It's composed of the many of the 92 elements, the fundamental, the natural elements, mostly of the carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. Those are the key elements which compose the guf, and certain minerals and so on. It's put together in a certain form, in a certain shape. It has different organs, digestive system, and lungs, and heart, and so on. And that's it. And it lies there. that's the guf. But it's a mtzias that has nothing to do with the neshama. These two entities are put together. The neshama is placed into the guf. You see. Now the guf, the substance of the guf, is composed of a substance which is very, very far from ruchnius. Very far. It's so far from ruchnius, you see, that it's almost neutral. You see. When the Bnei Shalom created the world, what it essentially did was, we say that the Bnei Shalom's creative process is called ha'ora. Remember we used that word? It's a process of hashpah. We don't know how he does that, but the Bnei Shalom is a being who, by his will, if he willed something, he's rotzen, there's something that comes out of him. It's not comes out of him, but we don't have no understanding how this works. But there's an influence which comes out of him, the hashpah. And that comes out and does something, whatever that is. That hashpah is called ha'ora, or ha'oras ponov. Ha'ora meaning to light or illuminate, because the Bnei Shalom, in some sense, metaphorically, is like a tremendous, like a light, source of incredible light. You see, in that sense, because the most subtle thing that we can understand in this world is energy, like light energy, right? Light itself is a substance. It's composed of, it has a certain substance, but it's the finest, purest form of substance in a way. So, since that's the highest form of energy or substance that we can conceptualize, right? We say we'll mandama that as a metaphor to the Rebbeinu Shalom in a sense. So when we say when the Rebbeinu Shalom therefore wants to do something, there's ha'oras ponav. That's what it means. His face. It means he looks at something in a sense, and he's mayor. It means he illuminates. Like it projects a light beam, or whatever it is. But let's be very careful that this has no shaykh to the Rebbeinu Shalom as such. It's only a metaphor that we used to understand. Okay. When the Rebbeinu Shalom does not want to do it, he blocks off the ha'orah. It's called hester. What he can do sometimes is project light, ha'orah, and then block it. That's called hester ponim. And that's essentially how the Rebbeinu Shalom acts. Fine. Now, when the Rebbeinu Shalom created the world itself, how did he create all reality? Very simply, it's reality due to ha'orah's ponav. He had a ha'orah, he produced a certain light, and that light that came out began to create reality. And the reality it created was a certain substance. Everything which exists needs to exist in substance. You know what I mean? Existence must be in something. Every entity is something itself. So what the Rebbeinu Shalom did, he created the first substance, which the substance was very pure, very spiritual. And then after that he created other substance, but the light went further and further away from him, so the light in a certain sense became more and more, the word is coarse, or thick, that's the word of that, that's the word, but it doesn't mean that it means the existence of the thing became more and more coarse. However, we can understand that. So that as the light went down further and further away from him, it created things with substances that were more and more further away, that had less and less ruchnius, you see. In that kind of sense. So, the neshama itself is composed of a substance which is very close to the beginning of Eretz Panav. The guf is composed of substances which is very far. It is a separate entity. Therefore, the guf, the material of the guf, has very little ruchnius in it. It has just enough to give it existence, of course. But its substance has very little ruchnius in it. And for all practical purposes, it's a neutral object, almost neutral, like zero. Okay, so now there are substances then, with the Rebbeinu Shalom created, which are even further than the guf, further down. And when you go all the way further into the negative realm, you get into the realm of the Yetzer Hara. Now, I did not go into it on purpose, but very simply, what I simply said was that the Yetzer Hara, right, or the Sitra Achra, as it's called in Kabbalah, but generally means the other side, you see, is a malach. He's a malach. And he's a very strange malach. He's a malach like Michael and Gabriel, or any other malach, the same one. And but he's a malach which is very different. In terms of his substance has ruchnius, like every malach. But in some way it's very far also. It's even further than the guf. So that the light that was created him is so far from ruchnius that there's a tremendous hester on that, and the substance that came out, the malach that came out, is very, very far.
Yet he's not material.
He's not a material thing. You see, we would think that the further you get away, the more material you become. He's not material. Rather, he's more evil. There's a different thing. Now, how that works, we're not going to go into it all tonight. But that's the thing. But he's a very powerful malach. Extremely powerful. For all practical purposes, he is the most powerful of all malachim. In the sense of what he can do. In the sense of what he is, he's the weakest of malachim. Because he has very little kedusha in him, as such. So therefore, he's very small. But in terms of his power, he's incredible. There's nothing that equals him under the Rebbeinu Shalom. And he was given that power because what we said was that the Yetzer has one main function, and that is to provide an alternative option or direction to the Rebbeinu Shalom. So that's why he was given such incredible power. That's what it is. Okay. The guf is somewhere in between, basically. Now, what happens is the Rebbeinu Shalom takes the neshama and puts it into the guf. Suddenly they became one entity. The neshama being imprisoned in the guf cannot substantiate or realize its origin or its source of experience. You see, it can very dimly feel something that's coming from somewhere that invigorates it. The person himself looks out and he can only realize what he sees from the five senses. What he realizes from the five senses. He cannot realize anything else. Now, why did the Rebbeinu Shalom create the guf in this way? Very basically. Because the Yetzer Hara, the Sitra Achra, in order to have power, or in order to be able to affect something, has to be able to affect it from a certain lower substance. The Yetzer Hara cannot affect the Neshama as such. So when the Neshama is placed in the Guf, the Yetzer Hara is able to act through the Guf and influence the Guf. He's able to act through the Guf, you see, and influence the Guf into certain directions, or directions, let's say, of his directions, of whatever have you, in terms of Gaiva, Taiva, Kov, all these things, which are, you see, which are directions of the Guf. So the Guf suddenly becomes activated in terms of its drives, its biological, physical drives, or even psychological drives. And these drives are felt by the person through the body, through the substance of the body. Because the Yetzer Hara is able to, the Malach of the Yetzer Hara, which is a koyach, he's a force, is able to work through that substance. You see what I'm saying?
The drives you through the substance.
What's that?
Through both the drives.
Well, no, the person feels the drives because the Yetzer Hara is able to work through the Guf, you see, and produce that kind of drive.
So the term biochemical drive is a product of the Yetzer Hara's influence?
Well, you need biochemical
We find that in
processes in order for the Yetzer Hara to survive. The Yetzer Hara needs a world which is very distant from Ruchnius. It needs a world which is very far from Ruchnius. It needs a level of substance, you see, which is very, very far from Ruchnius.
So what you're saying is that he utilized it, because the Behemoths have it as well.
Yeah, they have the same thing. He utilized them. Now the Yetzer Hara fundamentally, you have to realize, is essentially biological drives. That's his main power. At this point, as far as his main power are biological drives, and these biological drives come from the Guf. Where do they come from the Guf? So they come from the body. But you have to remember one thing: nothing comes from anywhere. Everything comes from Ruchnius, because that's where it all started. You see, the Guf itself was created. The Guf itself is nothing more than a substance which is very far from Ruchnius, but it was also created from Ruchnius. It has a certain koyach of Ruchnius in it to give it being. You see, the Yetzer Hara was a malach. You see. Or rather, in order for the Guf to feel certain things, it has to take its koyach from Ruchnius. Everything which exists in this world takes their koyach from Ruchnius, from that substance, and from that source, or else it cannot survive, and it cannot activate itself. You see what I'm saying?
But the Guf has the Ruchnius and food and survive without the Neshama. I mean, a dead body also exists, but it's not...
It cannot live without the Neshama. But it forms the base, or the vehicle, or the keli.
Well, a Neshama, a Gufa without a Neshama is nothing.
It's a dead body. It's substance. What?
Nothing.
Well, it's like this. It's like a piece. It's a physical substance.
It has some atoms moving around, but it's nothing.
Yeah. It's a physical body. That's all it is, essentially. But the Yetzer Hara, or the Ruchnius that comes from the Yetzer Hara, needs that kind of substance to become activated. You see, but even all the taivas are fundamentally Ruchnistic in origin, just like everything is. And those taivas come from the Yetzer Hara, except that it goes through the Guf. You see. Okay. So, the person then is in a quandary. His quandary is, shall he respond to the feelings which the Neshama gives to him, you see, to what he understands and what he knows, or should he respond to the feelings and drives which the body says he should have? That's the quandary.
It's rational versus irrational.
Not necessarily, well, depends. I wouldn't put it in those terms. This is essential. This is very simply one of the essential ways we're looking at Bechira. Fine. Now, let's say there's a certain amount of time that the Bonisham, the person has to have a test. Like you said, he has to have Bechira, right? Depending on how much Bechira he does, is Misakanam the Ksufa. Right? If you remember that. Okay. Now, let's say the Bonisham says this person has to live 70 years. And in 70 years, I will see through all the Bechira that he goes through, how much Nam the Ksufa he's misaken, or how much he's able to be koina on his own in Olam Haba. That's what it means. Fine, he's got 70 years. Sounds good. Okay, good. After 70 years, show's over. Okay, now, what does it mean the show's over? Well, let's see. We take the neshama, right? Take him out of the guf, then and subject the neshama to din to see whether or not it deserves Olam Haba. What happens to the guf? Well, we don't need the guf anymore, so it goes back to the ground. It goes into the ground and it disintegrates, and that's the end of it. The guf, from what you understand, is a cloak. It's a coat, that's all it is. It's a suit that you wear, you know. When you walk on the street, you don't walk on the street naked. You gotta put some clothes on. You see, you put the clothes on and so on and so forth. The same thing. And Neshama, in order to be able to do its tachlis, needs the guf to be able to do. So you go through the world, to go through Bechira and the avoided that's involved. You see, and Masaka Nam the Ksufa. That's essentially what it is. Good. Okay, the Neshama does this kind of thing. After it finishes, the Neshama is then taken out, separated from the guf, and that's it. So what is death? Death is nothing more than the necessary separation of Neshama to guf when the guf is no longer necessary. You see. And the Banishim judges the Neshama. If the Neshama required shleimus, remember, it has required a certain level of perfection of its state, then it's capable of going into Olam Haba, and that's where it will reside forever. What's wrong with that? That system sounds the way it should be. What's wrong with that system? Several things is wrong with that system. First of all, we see there's a clear tenet or clear emunah in Yiddishkeit of what's called Triyas HaMesim. And Triyas HaMesim says that fundamentally you must believe that there will come a time after the Moshe Mashiach when all the Neshamas will come back, or at least those who deserve it, or whatever the story, will come back down to their body, and the Banishim will reconstruct all the bodies. The person will get up as a body with a Neshama in it, as a human, as an Adam, which is what he is, right? And that's it. You see. So the shaila is, what is the purpose of this? You see. What is the purpose of a Triyas HaMesim? What is the purpose of a re-entry of the Neshama back to the Guf?
Reuniting.
A re-entry or reunification. What is that? And now that's number one. Number two, this is a cardinal belief, and it makes no sense. Number three, why the Neshama doesn't want to come back down? Because when the Neshama has to come down to this world, it wants to from a certain way because it realizes that it cannot get Olam Haba or enjoy Olam Haba unless it earns it. That's true. But unfortunately, it's not very happy with the fact that it's got to earn it by coming down to Olam Hazeh, which is a makom of tzar for it in a sense, because it's very far from its own substance. You're talking about physical reality, which is very far from that ruchnius. So why put the Neshama through that? You see, again. I mean, that's like an incredible thing, almost like a cruelty. You see. That's number one. So that's essentially, what we're seeing the way we understand Hashkafa makes the whole concept of Triyas HaMesim almost absurd. You see. So we're not on a level where we don't understand the significance of Triyas HaMesim. We're worse off. In the sense that there should not be any Triyas HaMesim. You see. It's contrary to the way things go. That's even worse. Okay. There's another question also by Adam Arishan. The Banishim says to Adam Arishan, B'yom HaHakam, the day that you eat from the Eitz HaDaas Tovah, you will die. It seems to be inferred that if he hadn't eaten from the Eitz HaDaas, he would never have died. What does that mean? What do you mean he would have never have died? How would you have separated the Neshama from the Guf? You see. So that doesn't make much sense. And that's clearly what it is. So it sounds like death. So it sounds like death comes as a result of a chet, sin, but it has nothing to do with the natural state of affairs that it's got to be divided and separated. Each one going through his own thing. Okay, that's essentially where we left off 2 weeks ago. Okay, very brief summarization. Is it clear? Okay. There's obviously something wrong with our system. And the easiest way to solve the problem is to simply say like this. Let's go backwards. Well, let's see. The Adam Rishon will not die. He's not going to die. So what does that mean? So how are you going to separate the two? Well, wait a minute. What was the premise of our system? The premise of our system is such that the whole function of the body, right, is essentially to provide a way for the Yetzer to influence the person, you see, and where the Neshama it becomes ignorant of its origin, you see. But the truth of the answer is that that's not really what it is at all. Because I make this statement, which is a very incredible statement, that's what you're responding to, that it was the kavanah of the Bnei Shalom, that the Neshama and the Guf together both go into Olam Haba. It was what the Bnei Shalom wanted, that once the Neshama goes into the Guf, it will remain there forever and never be separated again. So, how do you get to Olam Haba then? The answer is the Adam goes up as a full person right into Olam Haba. That was the kavanah. Now the question is, how is that possible? How can you take substance like a guf and put it into a place of Olam Haba, which is the biggest level of ruchnius? How do you do that? Okay, so the answer to this is the fundamental tenet called zichuch haguf. Zichuch means to purify. Haguf. The neshama fundamentally has a certain koyach. It has a very powerful koyach. And what is its koyach? The koyach is that when the neshama has enough shleimus, or enough or light in it, enough substance in itself, it can take the guf, you see, and purify it, so that it can take the guf, which normally is composed of gashmias, and purify the substance, so that the entire gashmias disappears, and the guf becomes ruchnius itself. You see, because what the Buddha is saying the following, he's saying to the guf, he's saying to the person, he says, look, he said to the neshama, I'm going to put you in a guf, and everything in you wants to get to ruchnius, but you can't get to ruchnius. Why? Because you have an anchor on your feet, and that anchor is called a guf. When you're in the guf with its drives in the other directions will not allow you to go up. You know, it's like you want to go up, right? You want to be double to the Baruch Shalom, and the guf drags you down. So you keep on pushing. So the Baruch Shalom says, if you try and be David and you punish shleimus, you'll be able to go up to Olam Haba. So the neshama says, how am I going to go to Olam Haba with this ankle on my feet? So the Baruch Shalom says, because what will happen is, you will have the koyach suddenly to change the nature of the anchor, and the anchor will suddenly lose all its mass, and it become zeroless weight. And you just simply go up with the anchor, you see. And it's up to you. You're the one who has the koyach, you're the ones that got to do it. You see. In other words, if you do the mitzvahs and you do what's necessary, you will purify the entire substance of the guf. And you then can take the guf with you to Olam Haba. Now, why did the Baruch do that? Why didn't he just send the neshama back in the Olam Haba itself? Right? For several reasons. But the basic major reason that I feel is true, you see, is the following. Is that Nam Nitzufa says, fundamentally, that what you do is what you get. That's what it is. There are many levels of that equation, and there are many levels of possible. For example, I can say to you, well, look, if you do act A, then, for example, if you stand on your head, I'm going to give you Olam Haba. Well, what you have to do has nothing to do with what you'll get. You see what I'm saying? Now, the truth of the matter is the two things are not really connected, right? So therefore, they're not really connected, but doing one gets you the other. But Nam Niksufa, pure Nam Niksufa says, it is much better if what you do is what you get. It's related. So that's what Nam Niksufa says. So Nam Niksufa says, the best thing to do is, if you are dovek to the Baruch Shalom, to your avoida, then your reward will be devekus. It's the same thing. To the extent that you're able to makarv yourself to ruchnius and to the Baruch Shalom, to that extent you will be korov to him. You see. So Nam Tzufa tries to make the person directly responsible for everything. So therefore it equalizes the avodah with the schar in the same way. Another thing that Nam Tzufa does is something else. It tries to make the person directly and only not only directly responsible, but only responsible. First thing. So that what happens is the following. When the Baruch says, you want Olam Haba? Work for it. I have the guf? Work for it. You'll be able to mazachi your guf, and it will no longer be a barrier. You see. And what happens is, to the extent in which you work, to that extent it will no longer be a barrier. And that will distinguish different people on different levels. You see. In Olam Haba, for example, there are many different people. There are many different neshamas. You see. There are different neshamas. We won't get into the question of how Adam became many different neshamas. But there are many different neshamas. You see. Now the Buddha was faced with a problem. How is it possible to give these different neshamas, or these different things, neshamas, different levels of Olam Haba, and make each one responsible for his own level? You see. Because what it is, for example, the Buddha would say, let's say you have three neshamas, A, B, and C. So the Baruch goes to the neshama A. A, you did a fabulous job, you get the top level. B, medium level. C, you did a poor job, you get the lowest level. Now, each neshama gets a different level because of what it worked, right? But Who is giving it? Who is placing it on the different levels? Ribono Shel Olam. What are the different levels? The different levels constitute the amount of ore that the Ribono Shel Olam wants to give out. You see. So the Ribono Shel Olam says, since A, you did the most avodah, I'm going to give you the most amount of ore. So therefore, I'm going to be made upon of like really powerful, 100 pounds of light, 100 lumens of light. B, right, didn't do so. So the Ribono Shel Olam says, I'm going to give you 50 lumens of light, 50 lumens of ruchnias. C, did a poor job, I'm going to give you 25. So the Ribono Shel Olam says, depending on what your avodah is, each one is going to take a different amount of illumination, which is ruchnias. You see. Now, who is the cause of this? The neshama. But the Ribono Shel Olam is also responsible, because in essence he's saying is, I'm the one who will control what you get. And so the better you are, the more I'll give. So therefore the distribution of levels in Olam Haba depends on the Neisan, who's the Ribono Shel Olam. You understand? But the Ribono Shel Olam doesn't want it that way, because Naaman the Ksufa says that we want the neshamas themselves, the individuals themselves, to control the level of distribution. You see, so that they themselves will have it. Now, how do you do that? How do you do that? I mean, so what the Ribono Shel Olam says is the following: I will give one level of ore. I'm going to give 100 lumens out, which is the maximum level of Olam Haba. You see, so if it's all one level that comes out, so every neshama can get it. No. So the Ribono Shel Olam says, you will be responsible for how much you receive. Thus, each of you go into a guf to the level that you're over and you're koine shleimus in your neshama. To that level, your guf becomes nizdachech, pure. You see, so that we find a differences of the level of purification of the guf. In other words, what the guf really is, it doesn't become ruchnius as such. Rather, it becomes transparent to ruchnius. For example, take glass, right? And you want to shine light through glass. Some glass, if you can see straight through glass, it's transparent, like a window, right? It means the light goes right through. Sometimes you can't see right through. You can see light, but you can't see shapes behind it, and that's called translucent, like the glass sometimes by a shower, you see. And then there's certain glass which is so thick, it's opaque. Nothing gets through. That's what the guf is. The guf essentially is a barrier itself. When the neshama is mezachit the guf, it either makes it transparent, translucent, or whatever have you. You see. So in other words, it changes the substance. Right now, in Olam Hazeh, the substance of the guf is totally opaque. You see. Before zichur, or before the neshama, it's opaque. Even though ruchnis comes down, or can come down, the neshama cannot reach it. It can't feel it, because the guf blocks everything from it. You see. If the person is over in Olam Hazeh, and he's mezachit the guf, well, to a certain level, then he converts it into a translucent thing. So therefore, suddenly the person can feel ruchnius, like a translucent, but he feels it weakly. And if he really does a good job, he mezach the guf to such an extent where the guf becomes almost transparent. So ruchnius comes through like a shine, so suddenly he feels it much stronger. You see, that is what distinguishes each individual in Olam Haba. You see, the level of zichur haguf, so that each person is responsible for what he got. That's absolute, that's the best level of Naaman the Ksufa. You see, where each individual is only responsible for the amount of ruchnius ha'ora he gets. Because each individual creates the barrier which will exist between him and the Ribono Shel Olam in Olam Haba. And that barrier which is ultimately determines what he's going to receive. You see, that's how Naaman the Ksufa is satisfied in a very meticulous sense. Okay? So that's why that's the way the Ribono Shel Olam can get around the distribution of many different levels, fundamentally. So far this makes sense. We understand a number of things. We understand certain major chidushim. Number one, the guf goes up with the neshama to Olam Haba, and that was the intention of the Ribono Shel Olam. And number two, the function of that is that it goes up, and the guf goes with the neshama to Olam Haba through a process called zichur. And number two, that process of zichur creates it differentiates the different levels. Those are the principles that we see. Now, so that sounds great. Okay, that sounds good. So then what is Misa? Then what is death? Now we have the question, Fakir. You know what I mean? The truth of the matter is you don't have to die. The neshama can drag the body up with it by just purifying it and so on. Who has to die? Where did this come from? Okay. This comes into the second aspect. So now we've turned the question on its head, the other way. And we're trying to answer the other way, like this. You know. What we see clearly is that the function of the neshama, the task of the neshama, is really, it's built for zichoch. You see, the neshama in its structure is built to be mezachech. The guf in its structure is built to be nizdachech, and that's how each one accomplishes its tachlis. You see, when this thing is activated by both, but each one has a different function relative to the thing. When Adam Rishon did the chait, there's something that happened. He did something which was very, very damaging. You see, which altered the situation drastically. What Adam fundamentally did by the chet is that by listening to the Yetzer Hara, you see, by eating of that, we won't describe what the dynamics of that chet was. You know how he was choyte, what it was. We won't. We'll assume he just did the chet, and that's the end of it. He did something very, very bad. By listening to the Yetzer Hara and eating the apple, what he did was he became dovek to that koyach of the Yetzer Hara. It's also a dovekis, because either you're dovek to the Rebbeinu Shalom or you're dovek to that koyach, and so on. What happens when you're dovek to that koyach? It has a very strange effect on Adam Rishon. The Yetzer Hara before Adam Rishon did the sin, which is called Adam Rishon Koydem Achet, right? What represented the Yetzer Hara? The Nachash, right? So first of all, it's a strange thing that a Nachash, what do you mean, a Nachash is an animal. It's an animal, it's a reptile, and so on. It's the same thing, it's almost like the Yetzer Hara is talking to him like an external object, or external subject, he's talking from the outside. Well, we don't know, what does that mean? We all have a Yetzer Hara talking to us in our brain, and a Yetzer Tov. When we have a machlokes of what we're going to do, first of all, we don't hear their voices clearly, that's number one. We feel them, it's not so much we hear them, we feel them, you see. But when we feel them, it's an internal struggle. This thing with Chava was an external thing. The Yetzer comes and says, I have a very good idea for you. Why don't you go, taste a little bit of that fruit over there? So she's having a discourse, a dispute there. Well, I don't know. I really can't do it. The Banishim says, no, and so on. Like, what was going on? What is this, a debate? With some, The answer was that the Yetzer Hara, before the Chet of Adam Rishon, was external to the person. He was not only external. He was external not only in terms of himself as a malach, but his koyach was external in a sense that what the Yetzer was able to do was, through the body of Chava, was able to stimulate certain drive to eat of the Eitz Hadas. But he himself, or the koyach of Tumah, or that koyach of substance that he possesses, or that he has control of, was not part of Chava. He as a being was outside.
He's given the alternative.
What?
He was given the alternative by staying outside.
Yes. He was given the thing, he was outside. You see. The Yetzer was a being that was outside of her, but was able to influence her through the guf and stimulate it, and with the koyach that he had. But he himself did not reside in Chava. His koyach and his force simply was able to be mashpia, but it wasn't in her. You see. You understand what I'm saying? His substance, whatever that was, the tumah, or whatever it had, wasn't in her. That's why the Yetzer of Adam Rishon before the Chet was represented by an actual being, which in that case was a snake, who's different than the snake of today. The snake of today is a real snake. It's just an animal like every other animal. But the snake of then was the being which personified the Yetzer Hara. And this concept of personification will become clearer later on. That there are certain things in the Bria which can personify him. In other words, they personify in the sense that his koyach is manifest through that presence in the world. And that's and that what represents him. That's a shaliach.
Explicitly in Chazal, above here and the other places.
Yeah, I see that.
Malachs of oil entering into.
Yeah, in that sense. So, because of the fact that the Yetzer was outside of Chava, he was therefore represented by Nachash. But once Adam and Chava did the Chet, everything changed. Because they were dovek him, he was allowed for his substance to actually invade the Bria itself. Now, when I mean the Bria, I mean his guf. His guf and the world also, because the guf and the Bria are considered the same thing. Yeah, the substance we're talking about is Gashmias, and that's composed of the 92 elements. Therefore, it's the whole universe and the guf of Adam. It's all the same thing. You see, what happened was the koyach of the Yetzer invaded that guf and resided in, so that the substance changed. It went lower. It went into the minus. Before the guf was, remember, zero or neutral. You see, And the Yetzer Hara was separate from it and lower, in that sense. Once he did it, the Yetzer Hara went up and the guf went down. And going in, suddenly the substance of the guf changed itself, so it went further away from whatever ruchnis it had, went further out, and the substance changed, so that if Adam Rishon could observe himself while he was doing the chet, and he would look at his hands and his body, he would see the whole thing change, almost like a werewolf, in that kind of sense. But it was an actual change. So we see the important thing, that the substance of Adam Rishon and the Bria before the chet was very different than it was after the chet. It was two different things. Yeah.
Why is it so?
Physically.
Turns out
We'll explain that in a second how it was done.
Turns out that the Rebbe started at a very big advantage, because the Neshama was within and the Yetzer Hara was without. So he had a big advantage.
And now that was within, and there's something else also.
Why was it that the Neshama is within and the Yetzer Hara starts without?
It was a much bigger advantage. But now that even the guf, what we see then, that the guf of Adam Rishon was not like our. See, our guf is already after the chet of Adam Rishon. It's after the damage has been done. That damage is called the kilkul, or what Chazal say, Zoyama of the Nachash. There's a Gemara that says that the Nachash hitul Zoyama in Chava. He projected forth a Zoyama. The word Zoyama means melucha. It means impurity, tumah, uncleanness. I mean, it's a ruchnistic thing. It's not a physical thing. And what Chazal say is that by the chet of Adam Rishon, hitul bo Zoyama. That's the thing. And what it means is that the Yetzer Hara became part of the Bria. So therefore the Yetzer Hara could no longer be represented by an animal or an external being. So that's why the Yetzer Hara became part of the person himself. So therefore all conflicts with the Yetzer Hara and Yetzer Hara are now internalized in terms of the very presence of the person himself. It's no longer a separate entity, you see.
You're not answering what he
What?
No, why was it that way, that the Neshama, if we have to do something to get the Dveikus, so before the Chet, when Adam was created, he didn't do anything for the Dveikus to the Rebbe Shem, so why is the Neshama inside?
Because of the
The Neshama should also start outside, and should have to do something to get the Neshama.
Because the body can't live without the Neshama.
Goof is nothing.
The guf itself is just a substance. The Neshama is placed into the guf.
So the Neshama has two objectives, just to give life, and also to give Dveikus.
Yeah, well, the Neshama is placed in the guf to give it life and be able to be concealed from ruchnias, so that it's imprisoned. It's placed in the guf to imprison it in the guf and function through the guf to klinish shlemus. It has to be klinish shlemus through the guf, you see. But the guf has its own needs from the Yetzer Hara and tries to drag it down. So the Neshama has to try and push it up, you see, in that kind of sense. And it's able to do it if it's over and if it acquires the Dveikus, then it begins to develop, it gradually acquires the ore in it to be metachich the guf, so that everyone can go into Olam Haba. You see, but the guf before was pure. It was, even though it was far from ruchnias, it was neutral, and it had a certain. It wasn't purely opaque. Adam Rishon Achet, the guf was not purely opaque. It was like between transparent and opaque, so that even if Adam Rishon was able to feel a certain ruchnias, even though he was in the guf. You see.
So didn't the Yetzer Hara have a lot more power than the Yetzer Hara back then?
When?
Before the
In a sense, yeah. Well, no. He cannot have more power.
So why did he do the Dveikus?
Okay, I don't want to go down. I want to just. What I'm talking now, I'm more. The Yetzer Hara can never have more power than the Yetzer Hara, or vice versa, or else there's no bechira.
What is it then?
It simply was that the mechama, or the choice, or the design of Adam Rishon was much easier. The task at hand was much simpler.
That's what I mean, yeah.
Okay, we'll get into that task. I don't want to go into that, but that was the task at hand. It was much simpler. And I realize you all have a tremendous Yetzer Toiv to understand from Adam Rishon, but I really don't want to get into that, because that's a whole limit into itself. That's very different. I first want to give you a clear understanding of the consequences of the Chet, and how the world changed. Because what?
You explained why it has to be. Why does it have to be that it's part of the guf now?
That's what happened. Because why did it develop that way?
No, you said that because of the chet, it had to be that way. Why?
Because of the chet, but what happened was there was consequence of the chet. Was damage to the guf.
Brought down.
But by the person doing the chet, he was dovek to the Yetzer Hara, and that force came into him. That tumah or piece of its substance, in whatever that is, entered him, so that suddenly he looked around, and suddenly his body changed, everything in the universe changed, everything which is composed of the elements suddenly changed. The Bria before was a substance which was more neutral, and there was a certain amount of ruchnis that came through. But now it became pitch black, so that there's nothing anymore. You can't feel a thing.
And we do the same thing on a lesser extent
Yes.
today.
Every time you do a chet, you do the same thing he did also, except that the consequences are no longer the same exactly. It only the first chet is what did it, and you just had to get Yetzer over to that bridge, you see. But once the Yetzer, the thing is, the Yetzer lives in Brooklyn and Adam lives in Manhattan, you see. Manhattan's a big island, right? Adam Rishon himself lived on Park and 45th. You see, the first job is to get over the river. You see, the first chet got the Yetzer from Brooklyn to Manhattan. That was the thing. Once it was in Manhattan, it's much easier to crawl up the 45th Street in Park Avenue. Once it's over, because it's a question of getting over land.
Had not Adam done that in the Chait,
Then
it would have been a later generation that he would have.
That's not, the thing is, that's a good question. The Kavanah of the Bnei Shem is that it should have ended with Adam. In other words, Adam was the man that was Mesugel to go into Olam Haba. Nobody else. Had he passed it, his neshama would have acquired tremendous right? And that would have been Mezachich his guf, level after level, and then Adam suddenly would have found himself on the level of Olam Haba, and even more than that, what we said last week is very important. What is Olam Haba? Olam Haba is Olam Chazer. Because as he's being Mezachich his guf, he's being Mezachich all substances which are related to his guf. That's the world. So he would have converted this world into Olam Haba. That's where Olam Haba is. Which world was it? You see, on a different level. Do you understand what I'm saying? This world, the world with the sun, the moon, the universe, this world is supposed to have been Olam Haba, basically. Except that the substance was capable of being Nizacher. The substance was much better. You see, the Bnei Shem connected Adam to the Bria. So whatever Adam does to his own body, he does to all things which share the substance of the body, or identical to it, which is the world. You're composed of carbon, hydrogen, and atomic. This is also composed of aluminum. Everything's composed of different, the same elements, the same atoms, in different elements. But fundamentally, we're all composed of our body. Our body has the same components as this lamp or this paper cord and so on. In terms of materials. If you reduce the body to materials, all you reduce is a bunch of elements. Hydrogen, oxygen. If you decompose the man, what is left? A lot of carbon, a lot of hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, aluminum, zinc, a whole bunch of stuff. That's Zekol Adam. It sounds funny, but that's all he is. In fact, I once saw, if you commercialize a person, if you would sell a material, how much is the person worth? If you sold what was in him, I think it came out to about $20. Or went up, inflation. That's it. If they want to reduce you to your elements and sell it on the market, you're really not worth that much. That's not part of the Adam.
Was the reason given last week to the way you understood his question in the first sense?
What?
Was the reason given to the way you understood his question initially?
I don't know.
And in other words, why the consequences of have to be so?
That is the consequence.
That is the consequence.
That is
the further question of why there has to be kilkul, why the nature of that kilkul has to be internalization of Ra, why is it just...
That's the answer to that question is I'm not. That's way further down the line. First, you have to understand what happens. Then,
curiosity, does it have anything to do? Would you find that has anything to do with the fact of equalizing the Hamid Sufa? Because once there's a head, the Hamid Sufa is now greater by failing the first opportunity.
I don't want to deal with that because the answer to this question lies in the essence of the Anagat Yichud. I don't want to deal with that. First, Halavai, we should understand what we're understanding because it's new.
So Adam,
it's a radical different thing.
Adam Rishon would have had a certain, 100 years or whatever.
Whatever X amount, no, he would have 3 hours. He was Erev Shabbos. That's it. Till Shabbos. The truth about it was, I said, there should never been a Shabbos. There would have been Olam Haba. It would have been Olam Haba. Shabbos was supposed to be Olam Haba. And Shabbos came in, it was supposed to be Olam Haba. Right, the 3 hours, that's all it was given.
It's not really chronological.
I mean, why did he blow it? That will go into the future.
That's why there's two narratives in Jewish Adam. In the Sheish Gracious and this one here.
A couple of different Neshamas and each one of them successful with successful.
It's possible. That's not what happened, but Chazal don't say how it's happened, but it's conceivable, yeah.
That could have just gone on, and then this time it's
definitely an optional scenario. There are many scenarios. You can't say what you said, but you can't say because you can't say that.
He knew in advance of what he does know in advance.
So in other words, wait a minute. Hold on. Hold on, 1 second.
No, not yet.
This is the concept. It's a radical concept in a sense, but this is the absolute emes of the situation. And if you look in the Derech Hashem, you'll see it, and you'll see it all. Anyone who knows any hashkaf knows this. There are many riots for the thing and so on, and you'll see instantly what the situation is. It's not a shita that I'm telling you. You understand what I'm saying? This is not a shita Rishonim here. You know what I mean? This is the absolute. There is no the absolute emes of what the situation is and of what the tachlis of the bria is in this kind of sense. So somebody may think, well, so somebody's there. He holds this way. It's not. It's not a there. So that's what happened with the substance. So what we see is that the substance, the world of Adam Mishach Kudmachet is a totally different here than Adam Mishach Achet. They're two different Olamas, which is incredible different. Most people think, that's what people tend to think of Adam as a regular guy, made a chet, he blew it, and I know he had to deal with it and so on. If you can't be mastic with Adam Mishach was Kodim Achet. What?
If you would have been there at the time, you wouldn't have seen Adam, you wouldn't have seen the world.
You could not have seen it, Mike.
Our eyes.
Yes. What he's saying is a very chiddush. The truth of the matter is, I'm not, but I would be inclined to say what he's true. The truth of the matter is, you probably would not have been able to see him with our eyes.
Would we have been able to see any animal?
The reason is because his body, there are 4 levels, there are 5 levels of spiritual deterioration or substance removal. There's the highest level is called Adam Kadmon. That is a super level. That's the 5th level. That's the highest level. Nothing is on that level except for certain things. But the ruchnis on that level is so the level of where Adam should have been in Adam Haba. That's the level of Adam Haba. That's how high that is. That's the level of where the Shem of Adam was, and it should have been Zachar to that point. The next level is called the Olam Atziyas. It's a lower level, but it's also extremely powerful. There's nothing that lives on that level except for the Neshamas also. The next level is called the Olam Bria. It's Aleph Beis or Bria, which is a lower level. It's the 3rd level down. Very powerful, pure level of Ruchnias. The only one that lives on that level basically is the Sahaponim, the highest of the Malachim. Every other Malachim is down. The next one is Olam Yitzira. And the Malachim in general live on that level. And the lowest level is the Olam Asiyah. The Olam Asiyah is the level of the Guf. That was where the Guf was of Adam was, on that level. You see, all of these 4 levels are called Aleph Beis Yud Ayin. Asiyas, Bri, Yitzirah, and Asiyah, so it's an Avya. That's how you remember, those 4 numbers. These are nothing more than existential planes of substance. That's all basically what they are. Now, anyone which is on a higher level is aware of lower levels. But anything on a lower level is not aware of a high level. A Malach, you see, cannot begin to understand the Sa'aponim. It's not there's nothing to relate to. And the mashal I gave was, for example, could a monkey, a chimpanzee, understand a human being? No. Could he understand what the power of the human mind? No. Could a spider understand the chimpanzee? No. Could a virus understand the spider? Do you understand what I'm saying? You're not dealing with, he can understand a little less. No. Each one has no shaykhs to the world of the other. As far as concerned, it's like it's a being which is out of its existence. Like, a spider says, what is, in heaven's name, is a chimpanzee? What is the thing? Can a water bug understand, a cow? He can realize its effects, but he cannot understand.
And it can perceive.
As it's being crushed, it cannot speculate on the nature of its crusher.
But it can see it.
What is doing this to me? I don't know, I'm a little facetious, but that's what it is. The same thing. A Malach on Yitzir, which is very high, cannot begin to speculate what the Sa'aponim is. You know what I mean? And a Malach and a Neshama is the highest. The truth is, the Malachim cannot speculate what a Neshama is really. And that's how high the Neshama is done. So that's the thing. What he's saying is probably correct. Adam Rishon was on the level of Asiyah with a Neshama inside. So he's a combination of something in the Olam Atzilus inside a substance of the Olam Asiyah. 2 different substances locked together. Okay. I see. But Olam's body was an Olam Asiyah. We, after the Kilkul, have been reduced to the Olam what's called the Olam HaGashmias. That's what we are. Can we understand Adam? No. We probably couldn't even sense it. We're not aware of the nature of that kind of a guf. You see what I'm saying? If Adam Rishon would be in front of you, he probably would be invisible. Just like a malach is
So
invisible.
you're adding a new oilam now.
What?
You're saying oilam adashmi
Yes,
and you lower
it's but it's not really a new oilam. It's rather oilam atziyah in a state of kilkul. It's not really new oilam. You see, it's not a really new oilam. It's in a state of kilkul. There's a zoyama. The substance has been. There's a zoyama which came into it, and it was makulkul. You see.
I want to understand one thing. I think it was brought up last week. But it's not something that happens all of a sudden. The more a person does avodah, the closer he gets, and the more transparent it becomes. So it should be a gradual thing.
No, not really. Yes and no.
It should become more and
It
more
should.
transparent.
Yes and no. By Adam Rishon Kodim Achet, since the guf itself had no kilkul, nothing, then the more Adam Rishon did the mitzvah, the more he listened to the guf. Then the neshama would be creating more and more strength or oris, and the guf would have the substance gradually become transformed in a progressive way. Once the kil came in the bria, the whole thing changed. Now, what changed? I want you to understand this concept, okay? I think the whole thing changed. What changed? Change was the following: is that let's say Adam Rishon would have, he did the chet and he continued to live and so on. What would have happened? And let's say he would have done mitzvahs, kept on doing the mitzvah. He did one, he did one chet, and he would have then continued doing mitzvahs with no more chatoim at all. But what happened is the following: the neshama would start getting more and more oris, right? Because as you do a mitzvah, you plug in, right? You get more and more oris. But the oris would not have been able to purify the guf anymore. Can't. Because once the guf contains the zoyama or the tumah, you see, it cannot be purified. It can only be purified from a neutral level up. You see, without any tumah in it. Once it has certain tumah, it cannot be purified in that sense at all. For example, an example is that if you go into a room, for example, and you want to move into a certain apartment, and there are people living there, you cannot move in until the old people move out. You see what I'm saying? Or as my brother gave a good example the other time, he said, let's say you will come into a place and you want to design it, interior decorate it, and you want to make it really beautiful. But the place happens to be filthy. So the first thing you have to do is clean out the filth. You got to clean the place up. And then you can start making it a beautiful thing, you see. But once the filth is in, you got to get rid of the filth. If you let the filth in and you start decorating the place beautifully, it just doesn't work. It's the same thing. Once the zoyama was in the guf and in the bria, it was no longer capable of zichor. So even the neshama would continuously be kind of more and more oris, it could not act on the guf. It would be kind of oris. It would become strong in and of itself, but it cannot influence the guf.
So potentially it remains.
Towards its potential. Yeah. So, what does the neshama then have to, what happens then? So this Banishim says the following. He said to Adam, he says, and this is what went on over here. What the Banishim said to Adam is the following. The day that you eat of this tree, you will die. You will surely die. So everyone learns it as an einish, right? He was nenash. He wasn't nenash. That's not an einish. What the Banishim simply said was the following. The day that you eat of the tree, you will become David to the Ra. And once you become David to the Ra, you cannot enter Olam Haba, which is your fundamental tachlis. You see, you will be grounded to Olam Hazeh, no matter how big you become. So, in order to save the situation and be matz on you, what I essentially have to do is the following. I have to take the neshama out of the guf, and then take the guf and be matz its tzura. In other words, I have to let it disintegrate back into its original elements. And once it loses its tzura, then the tumor goes out. Because the tumor must remain in something which, an entity. In other words, I have to disintegrate the entity. You see. And once I do that, and then I will reconstruct it again into a new entity. A new start. Because then the guf suddenly is in it. And then I put the neshama into the guf, right? And then the neshama can be mezach the guf. You see what I'm saying?
Many things you hear about speaking that their guf didn't disintegrate. They stay exactly
the thing...
because they
Okay.
reached the clearing point.
No. No, it's not that kind of, because the thing is on it has to... Well, leave that go for a second in terms of that. But that's the basic principle. So what the Buddhism was saying is that if you eat from this tree, the only way that you can get into Olam Haba is through Misa. Misa meaning a temporary separation of the thing, and so that I can cure the body of its illness. I can redo it. That's, you've damaged the house. I've got to fix the thing. So the only way to do it is to be mastered its tzura. It's in a sense like a kli cheres. And interesting, a kli cheres is the one that comes from where? A kli cheres comes from the earth, which is where Adam. That's when the Buddha says Ela Ofa Toshuv. And once tumah comes in the kli cheres, Shvirosan Himatawasan. That's it, you've got to break it. You can't put it in Tom Tovot. It means when you break it, it loses its tool, its Shem as a Keli. And then you can reconstruct it or whatever the situation is. Because anything which is constructed from the offer, once it gets tumah, apparently that's its tahara. So what the Banishim says, once the Zoyama goes in, you see, the only way that we will redo it, we've got to reduce it, disintegrate it down, lose its tool, okay? Then I will reconstruct it, and then I'll put you the neshama back in, and then you'll have the koyach with whatever you have to be mezach to go. That is Tchiyas HaMesim. You see. In other words, it was never the intention of the Bnei Shalom for Misa. Because Misa is an alternative. It's a deviation of the original objective. The Bnei Shalom would rather have the neshama mezach to go and then go into the mabo, according to the level of zichoch. But once what happened was, once the neshama, once the guf become, thing, what happens, the guf then became permanently opaque. It cannot change. You see. So the Bnei Shalom has to destroy it, or disintegrate it, reconstitute it, and do that. You see. That's what the Emunah Tchiyas HaMesim is. You see. So that everyone comes back, reconstitute guf, and then suddenly, then is Dachach, and then Olamah, Haba is created. Now, what is true of the guf is true of this world too. Also. Which means that just like the guf was Koina Azoyama, the Bria was Koina Azoyama. Well, in a sense, therefore, the Bria has to die. In that sense. And that does happen. What Chazal say is that the amount of time that Olam Hazeh will last, or the amount of time that the Bnei Shalom wants to give an Adam or all people, according to whatever scheme it is, to Masaka Nam Tzufa, or to earn Olam Haba, is 6,000 years. We will explain that later on. 6,000 years. And we're up to 5,744. So we're not far away from the end, what constitutes the end. Olam Hazeh will not go on after 6,000. It will end at that point. Okay. Now, at the end of 6,000, what will happen is, the Bnei Shalom therefore will take all the people that we Tchiyas HaMesim before, and take them out with their guf, and put them into Gan Eden. And then he will destroy the world, or disintegrate it, for 1,000 years, and then rebuild it, for a new Tchiyah. What? Yes, everyone goes to Gan Eden. Because Tchiyas HaMesim, at the point of Tchiyas HaMesim, they're all in a new guf, and they're all mezachachet, you see. As soon as the neshama goes in, it's dichok, you see. And then he puts, yeah, the guf probably go to Gan Eden with the neshama. Well, if you can go to Olam Haba, can go to Gan Eden. Wait a minute. Okay, we didn't get to what Gan Eden is for a second. Okay, 1 second. So we have this kind of thing. But in the end 6,000, so in that, because that's what it says, Shis Alfei Shnin, that the Olam Hazeh is 6,000 years, the Chad Chorov. In the 7,000 years is when the Bria will experience Misa. See, and after that, in the 7,000 years, begins the Tkufa of Olam Haba. I don't know. Why does it take? These are the cheshbonos. Why? We have to work on that. It's possible to probably figure it out, but I have to work on it. Okay. What? I don't know. It's hard to say. You have to answer that. You have to answer why does the world last 6,000 years? And the shayla is, why does the whole Tikkun Nasa take 6,000 years? If you understand that, you'll understand why it takes 1,000 years. Okay, whatever the story is.
It's related to Shishmei Bereshis because the whole scheme is supposed to be played out.
It's not that simple, because that question really revolves on something else. A whole concept which is totally outside of what we discussed, which in a certain sense is that's further down the road, much more advanced.
In terms of curiosity, referring to
who?
Just in terms of satisfying curiosity, just know what you're thinking.
Goza Chochmosai.
What
does it mean Goza? It's Goza. The Bnei Shalom was Goza according to his Chochmah. What does it mean his Chochmah? What is that? Yeah. And there are many things like why 6,000 years.
Arbitrary. It seems arbitrary.
It seems arbitrary, but there's thing. Now the Shaila is that itself subject to Chochmah. It is, because it says Chochmah. So the Shaila is if we can know that,
so
and that depends.
Who says that the year is, the counting is different here?
Well, okay, but assuming that the counting is the same. So this is the thing. Now, what I want to say very clearly is that when the Bnei Shalom takes the neshama out of the guf, right? Then the guf has to go into the ground and disintegrate. That takes a certain amount of time, X amount of time. Now, what happens to the neshama meanwhile? You see, while it's waiting for its guf to be reconstituted. Well, what the Bnei Shalom did was create a place called the Olam HaNeshamas, or what we traditionally call Gan Eden. And the Bnei Shalom takes that neshama and puts it in the Gan Eden. And while it's in the Gan Eden, it begins to enjoy what it will enjoy in Olam Haba. Temporarily, on a limited fashion. In Olam Haba. Until the transformation takes place, and then Olam Haba is constructed. But it's not in the same way. So when we say that when people die, they go to Gan Eden, what we're really saying is that they're going to a place where they're waiting. But while they're waiting, they're enjoying themselves. That's really what Gan Eden is. According to the Madreg of Avoda, or Dvekas, that each one was koina. You see. That's essentially what it is. Not everyone goes to Gan Eden. The ones that don't go to Gan Eden have a much bigger problem.
What happens with cause the Hester of the Neshama without the Guf?
Oh, okay. Right. That's to say, each neshama, right? Each neshama. How is the individuation in Gan Eden? I don't know.
Well, you're going to maintain there's any difference there?
There's no guf there, so they can't be different. How do you differentiate in Gan Eden?
What?
Each one.
That's the whole thing. Well, that's the whole thing. You mean each one?
You can't have that because the next time around they come around. It's
a strange thing to say. It's a big question. The question is, while the neshama is waiting for its guf, right? It goes to Gan Eden. All neshamas go to Gan Eden, right? And they wait there, and they have an aspect of Olam Haba, right? So the question is, if they don't have their guf, it's the guf which differentiates one neshama from another, according to Zichar, what differentiates them in Gan Eden in terms of what each one enjoys.
I mean, even more fundamentally, why is it that they don't have a complete aura upon him? Where's any level of
well, that's it. Right, it's all part of the thing, right? So what you want to say is that each one differs, that there is no difference, but each one differs in terms of the Namak Sufa. Those who are more over it and were more shalom can enjoy the thing. They can take more and enjoy it. Those who have less take it all, but they don't enjoy a certain percentage.
That's
the next question. If it can happen in Gan Eden, why can it happen in Olam Haba? Right. Right. If you can the point is, if you can differentiate in Gan Eden, you know what I mean? What do you need to go? Let's do the same differentiate in Olam Haba. And the Shaila is more fundamental. How do you differentiate? First of all, how do you differentiate? Number one, and if you do differentiate, why can't that be the rule in general? Okay, those are strong cautions. Okay.
I don't understand. If the world was created a certain way, how can it be so? Like as soon as Adam does the chet, the whole thing's going to change.
Yeah.
That the original plan was supposed to be.
In case that happens, as an option. What?
I mean, what? I don't understand. How do you compare us to? I mean, what are we doing here? Were we supposed to be here originally, or was like an after effect?
We're not going to get into. Well, we
Sounds like the opposite question.
Well, yeah, it's not the opposite. No, not exactly. Originally, what the Baruch wanted was to Mekayim the Tachas of the Bria through Adam Rishon only. Okay, that was the Tachas. When Adam failed to do what he's supposed to do, you see, he damaged the Bria and he damaged his own guf and made it therefore a whole new. The route to Olam Haba became a long one. Instead of the simple route that he had before the Chet, right? The route now to Olam Haba was much lengthier and more difficult, right?
Is it hard? Is it more difficult? Is it just as rewarding?
It's much more difficult. The Shaila is more rewarding. In a sense, it is. In a sense, it's not. In a sense, it is. But I won't. I'm going to leave these questions for a little later.